Several days after Christmas passed quietly. On the 30th, JR and Brent drove home to Gainesville. And Jim and Claude and the rest of the family flew home as well. That afternoon at 3 o'clock, JR approached his daddy to talk about the possibility of having a New Year's party for him and his friends at the ranch. Jim Bob had told him that there was no way they could have it at his house because his aunt may have appendicitis. Please, Daddy, can we have a party here? There's no way in hell I'm going to let you have a party here at my house, at my ranch, Jim said. That evening, after dinner, Elizabeth took JR aside. I don't think that's fair that your daddy did that. He'll let Kyle party, but not you. This is my ranch, Elizabeth said. I know, Grandma, I'm sorry, JR said. Don't worry, Brent said. I already talked to an aunt of mine. She has a house in the country club, not far from the Sanders house where your father's and the rest of the family are going. I think we should have our party there. Without Brad and without Jim Bob, Brent said. Sounds great, Gerald said. The 31st, everything was filled with anticipation. That morning at breakfast, it was announced that Jim and Betsy, Claude and Becky, Kyle and Madison would go to the Sanders for the party. Christine was already gone to her friend's house, Jennifer, and so that was to be taken care of. That afternoon, about 5:30, Darren loaded up the Hummer that JR had received from his father, with JR and Brent to take them to the party. Ken greeted them at the party. It was a very warm time for all. Meanwhile, at the Sanders, they were talking about Jim's upcoming appointment with the Clinton administration. There were mixed feelings about this appointment, but it was a good time for all. The party consisted mostly of a band with 60s and 70s music, popular among Jim's crowd. Meanwhile, JR, Brent, and Ken are playing Monopoly. Dave Smith stops by at 8 p.m. for the rest of the party. It was a good night for all. By midnight, everyone was saying Happy New Year. At 12:30, everyone loaded up in cars and headed back to the ranch, except for Ken and Dave Smith, who went to their homes. The next day, JR wakes up at 3 a.m., coughing, sneezing, and with a fever. Downstairs, he can tell that they're listening to the music video from the party from the night before. All of a sudden, he heard an argument between Jim and Kyle downstairs. If you got JR a dang Hummer, why did you get me a Ford F-150? Oh, calm down, Kyle. Look, he's in college trying to prove himself. And ever since you turned 17, 18, you've been nothing but a drifter. You got to prove yourself to me, boy. Stay here and help me run this ranch. January 2nd passed by quietly. JR had informed Karen that he wasn't well enough to go to church. She was not very happy about it. On the 3rd, JR woke up still coughing and everything. Elizabeth said that she would take JR to the doctor of Dr. Sandra Jordan, a new doctor that was in the medical clinic affiliated with the hospital. The next day, the 4th, Elizabeth took him to the clinic where the doctor prescribed some Claritin for him. And Elizabeth put her late husband's humidifier in his room. He was able to rest and relax perfectly. The next day, he was doing quite a bit better. However, let's backtrack to the 3rd of January. President Bill Clinton is on the phone with Stephen Breyer. I want to talk to you about this Hendrick appointment. What do you think? Well, I've heard of him. I was a judge that saw him when he was on the CFTC. And he's okay. He's just maybe a bit too ambitious. Looked like he had an eye for the presidency. I said, look, you need to watch that. And I said, well, the SBA might be able to something to keep him going. Keep him in line for a little while, at least for us, Clinton said. On the morning of the 5th of January, JR wakes up feeling a little better. He talks to Jim, Bob, and Ken for a little while. The 6th and 7th pass quietly. On the morning of the 8th, the family wakes up around 5 a.m. Kyle and Jim stand in the front of the ranch. Jim embraces Kyle because today was the day that Jim's firstborn grandson was to be born. Man, I'm proud of you. Damn proud of you. And Jim says. At 8 a.m., they arrive at the hospital. Dr. Karma Green induces labor. This will take about 8 hours. Meanwhile, JR is at the ranch watching the news when the crisis in North Korea was taking place and how the press was covering the Clinton administration's approach to Korea. At 1 p.m., JR picks up, and Brad picks up JR for his National Federation of the Blind meeting. Brent goes to see his aunt for the afternoon. I'm glad to see that you're feeling better, Brad said. Hey, when we get to the house, I want to show you guys something. They go to the house of one of their old prep school tutors that especially had worked closely with JR. Mrs. Charlene Peacock. Brad showed JR and Mrs. Peacock his Apple PowerBook, an awesome looking laptop. Mrs. Peacock was impressed. She had worked with JR primarily in his sophomore year, the 1985-86 school year at Reese Prep. Now, with that, they go to the NFB meeting where they talk about the 2 delegates the chapter was going to send to the seminar. The chapter president, as well as Miss Peacock, would be going to Washington to represent. When they got home, everything was going well. Until later on that night, JR got a text from Karen. I won't be taking you to church because I'm leaving to go to college away tomorrow. And JR, you'll just cancel church for me anyway. You used to find the time, but now you won't even try. So now that you know that we're over, goodbye. The next morning, JR is crestfallen as he wakes up. Now, don't be so downhearted, Elizabeth said. You know that her mother is a feminist who would never accept your father anyway. So you're better off finding somebody else. There's other fish in the sea. Yeah, don't be so down, Brent said. Jennifer Bowers is good. We'll leave at 8 and you can come to church with me. And so that's what happens. At 9 a.m. at the hospital chapel, a Methodist minister baptizes Kyle's baby, Andrew Cade Deadstone. The night before, Kyle had gone to a saloon with friends to drink and celebrate the birth of his firstborn. And all his friends and associates would call him Wily Kyle to this day. As JR leaves out of the driveway, Claude arrives in the living room to talk to the family. He had received some news from the National Enquirer. Jim and Norma Sanders were hereby filing for legal separation in Washington, D.C. Oh no, that means their house in the Odessa Country Club is going to be for sale, Betsy said. I bet they squabble over that, Jim said. Enough of the bad news. Think you know about the good news. My firstborn grandson's going to be here soon, and I'm going to be happy to see him. 10 a.m. JR goes to the Community of Christ Church with Brent. The topic seems to be about repentance. And JR seems to be somewhat enjoying the church service. Afterwards, he comes back to his dorm. Man, what's up? Kevin McDonald said. Me and Karen, we're over, JR said. Don't be so down, man. Look, my mom packed some sandwiches for the road, and I thought of you. Have one and some cookies, and here in a little bit we'll go to the golf course. By 1:50 p.m., they had been in the golf course for about an hour. Kevin was winning against JR, but it was all in good fun. And it being in January, it was golf lanes. A place, there was an indoor golf course near the Texas Tech campus. "5 p.m. JR is having dinner at the Spirit Club. Sitting next to him at the table is Stoney Rosen, C.V. Coleman, and Sharon. She dumped you, didn't she? Sharon asked. Yes, ma'am, JR said. We're over. You didn't need someone as narrow-minded as her. There's no doubt is being called kid by Brad around campus, Sharon said. You're right, JR said. 7:30 p.m. JR goes to the Sneed snack bar, orders a few drinks, and picks up his cell phone to call Jennifer Bowers to come. By 8 p.m., she arrives. You two broke up, didn't you? Jennifer said. Yes, ma'am, JR said. I think we should start with just friendly dates. JR said, hugging her. I like you, JR. Don't worry, everything's going to be okay. You can hang out with your public affairs and Spirit Club friends. 9:30 p.m. Jennifer walks with JR to his room, and they have one last hug. I'll see you tomorrow night at 7, JR said. 7, Jennifer says. Great idea. Back in his room, JR opens up his ThinkPad, taps into the Texas Tech University network, and emails Ken. Dear Ken, you should know that Karen Kreider and I are over, which I'm sure is going to put tears in Jim Bob's eyes. But I don't really care. I'm seeing Jennifer Bowers now. Just friendly state dates to start. And as you know, I blame Karen Kreider, his father, for how she turned out. I'd gladly take the Swainfield Ranch poker from the fireplace to hit him over the head. Meanwhile, Kyle has had his first